Go.
Welcome to everyone joining us from across the United States and around the world. My name is Carol Booth Olson, and I'm the director of the Wright Center. The Wright Center is a research and development center based at the University of California, Irvine, that is funded by the Institute of Education Sciences. We are committed to supporting our growing community of teachers, school leaders, education stakeholders, and college faculty by offering resources and learning opportunities like today's webinar to improve secondary writing instruction. The Wright Center, in partnership with the National Writing Project, is so honored to host this webinar series dedicated to supporting teachers' hybrid and remote literacy instruction. This series will continue in September with 3 webinars that focus on culturally responsive, sustaining remote education, transformative justice in English language arts, and youth civic voice in writing to express complex emotions. I will provide details on these 3 webinars offerings at the conclusion of today's session. I'd now like to provide some digital logistics. So we're very excited to say 2,100 people are registered for this event. The first 1,000 people are participating on a Zoom webinar platform. If you're joining us through Zoom, you can ask questions using the Q&A feature. On most devices, you'll find this at the bottom of your screen. For those of you viewing on YouTube live stream, you can ask questions using the chat function that is also most likely located to the right of your screen. We have several moderators on both platforms that will be monitoring the Q&A and chat feed. They're going to do their best to gather your questions. If there's a burning question that you all upvote, we might interrupt Troy and ask him to address it during his presentation, but otherwise we'll be handling most of those during the Q&A in the last 30 minutes of the event. If you'd like to tweet about this event, please tag us at Wright_Center with Wright all in caps and use the hashtag WrightOn. Now I have the great privilege to introduce our speaker for today, Dr. Troy Hicks, who will be talking about designing purposeful and engaging arcs of writing instruction in an era of remote learning. And clearly it's a very hot topic that people need to know more about. Troy is a professor of literacy and technology at Central Michigan University, and his work focuses on the teaching of writing, literacy, and technology, as well as teacher education and professional development. He's a former middle school teacher, loves collaborating with K-12 colleagues to explore how to implement new literacies in the classroom. He's also a National Writing Project site director with his site at Central Michigan University. He has written many books, including Crafting Digital Writing, The Digital Writing Workshop, Because Digital Writing Matters, and his newest book, Create, Compose, and Connect. In 2011, he won his university's Provost Award for outstanding achievement in research and creative activity. Most important, he is the father of 6 digital natives who are always teaching him something new about writing and technology. And now we welcome Troy Hicks, who will be leading our session today on the topic of purposeful and engaging arcs of writing instruction for remote learning. Take it away, Troy, and thank you so much for doing this for us.
Thank you, Carol. I really appreciate this opportunity. Anytime I get to collaborate with colleagues from National Writing Project and those who bring that mindset about teaching and thinking about writing in more robust ways is always powerful. So right away, I want to address a comment in the chat. And yes, please, we are going to try to do something today that will emulate for you the types of literacy practices and teaching approaches you could use in remote learning. So you will see here in the middle of the screen, there is this joinpd.com. We are using a tool called Pear Deck. So that is the PD, so hence joinpd.com. And then yes, you would enter that code, the XNTUN. And for those who may not be familiar with Pear Deck, I'll give just a brief explanation. It's one of a couple different tools. Nearpod is another very popular one where you as the educator are able to build a slide deck, and then on top of that slide deck, you are able to build interactivity. So one of the things that Carol, Janelle, the whole team from the Wright Center and I have been talking about over the past few weeks is this idea that typically when I do a webinar, or when I'm sitting here in a Zoom room, I am leading a session, with either a small group of students, maybe 40, 50 people in a workshop, or I'm having a one-to-one or small group conversation. It is something new and different for me to deliver a 2-hour webinar where we have some level of interactivity with the Q&A, and where we will also then try to have some level of interactivity with Pear Deck. And I know that different schools and districts have different policies about when and how you are able or not to be able to communicate with your students using synchronous video chat, such as Zoom, WebEx, Google Meets, or so forth. And I also know that many different teachers have a number of different approaches to the ways in which they would do that. Some actually use their time in a writing workshop style format where students log in and they are engaged fully in a conversation and dialogic instruction. Some are a bit more presentational, sharing information and taking a Q&A, kind of like what we're doing right now. So the whole goal, though, here for our time together today is that I want to demonstrate for you the ways in which I might try to engage in a more dialogic type of instructional activity using Pear Deck. And we'll probably be doing that. We'll use Pear Deck throughout the whole presentation. But then also, as we get a little bit further along, I'm going to open it up and try to hear from you and see what kinds of arcs of instruction you might want to create too. And so I'm going to leave this up on screen for just a moment more. And then I also know my colleagues who are moderating, like Janelle, will be able to drop that link to joinpd.com into the chat room. I see that we're getting quite a few of you logged into the Pear Deck interactive slideshow. And I've actually got it pulled up on my iPad too, so I can see what you're experiencing, just so I kind of have that as a frame of reference. The one other nice feature about Pear Deck in particular is that it allows unlimited participants. So you are able to broadcast to your 25 students in class, maybe all 125 if you're a middle school or high school teacher and you're trying to do one session at once. Or today, we could have hundreds, perhaps even thousands. So I appreciate everybody joining in. I will leave this join code up for just a few minutes more. One more kind of piece of logistical information, you should have access to a shortened URL, a bit.ly short link. I'm dropping it in the chat for our Zoom participants. I know it's been put on the Wright Center page. I hope that it's going out in the YouTube stream. That will force copy a version of today's handout. And pretty much every single link that I'm going to talk through from the slide deck is also on that handout, and you will be able to create a copy of the slide deck. So I think the link will turn it into a view only or a forced copy of the slide deck, but then you're able to take that slide deck and make a copy for yourself as well. So in just a moment, I'm going to pull down this little join code from Pear Deck. Janelle, are there any burning questions from the chat? Anybody having significant trouble getting into the Pear Deck before I take this down and we kind of jump into the presentation? And yes, I will reshare the bit.ly. There we go. And yes, I would
just to remind folks that this join PD code, doesn't this stay present in the upper right-hand corner of your slides for folks that are joining a few minutes late?
It will, and I can always bring this join screen back up as well. Yep. All right, and there was one question in the chat. Is this for higher education too? So yes, I am a university professor. I teach writing at the college level. I've also been a middle school teacher. So we're going to move through many, many different tools, and my hope is that they're going to be applicable to everyone from elementary school all the way up to the college level. And of course, we can have some dialogue about how all of this works together. All right, well, with that in mind, we are going to get started. And again, if you need that join code at any time, it's right up there. And we'll periodically drop that back in over these first few minutes of the webinar if people have questions or concerns. So welcome to Purposeful Arcs of Writing Instruction. As it has already been mentioned, my name is Troy Hicks. You can find me online almost anywhere. Gmail, Twitter, my website, I'm Hickstro, pretty much everywhere. So if you need to reach out, I would be happy to talk with you afterwards. I'm kind of trying to monitor my Twitter over here as well. I'm monitoring the chat and presenting. So if I don't reply right away, just know that I'd be happy to talk to you a bit more later. Before we officially begin, I have two items that I'd like to just pause and take a moment to acknowledge. First of all, wherever you might be joining us in the world, and we will find out where you're joining us from here in just a few moments. If we were joining from where I live here in the middle of Michigan and on Central Michigan University's campus in particular, I'd like to offer this land acknowledgement to say that we are here on the beautiful lands maintained for generations by the Anishinaabe people, the indigenous inhabitants of Michigan, with whom we continue to partner with today at CMU. And so our relationship with the Anishinaabe people has been strong for decades. They were pivotal in the conversations about keeping the Chippewa name affiliated with Central Michigan University. And so we appreciate that relationship and celebrate it. The other thing I'd like to pause.
My apologies, I'd like to step in for one moment. Troy, your slides are not visible on the YouTube yet, and I just wanted to make sure that that gets addressed as we're now on the third slide. Janelle, are you able to spotlight his thing?
One second, please.
Sorry about that, Troy.
Oh, that's okay. I would just say too, if for any reason they are not visible on the YouTube stream, people are able to click into that link from the companion document as well.
One possible solution could be to reshare your screen.
Okay, well, I can try that. Let me stop sharing for a moment and I will jump back in. We'll see how this goes. Let me know if that's visible now.
There's a minor delay, so I'm just waiting for that delay to pass. We're good. Thank you very much. Sorry about that.
No, that's quite all right. I appreciate you pausing. And as we all know, we are trying to manage multiple streams here and deliver to hundreds of our colleagues. So we want to make sure we are as accessible as possible. So thank you. So in addition to the land acknowledgement, I would also like to take just a moment to acknowledge the moment we're in now and the work of the National Council of Teachers of English and their stance on anti-racism. And this is a statement that was released just over a year ago by the NCT Committee Against Racism and Bias. Being an anti-racist educator is a verb. As our nation seems to grapple with acts of hatred more frequently, we as educators must consider our actions. We need to consider where we've spoken and where we've been silent in terms of quelling the growing violence our country faces. These perpetrators were once students. Our teaching must therefore be an act that addresses, challenges, and dismantles racism in all its forms. Anti-racist educators actively confront and challenge racism. And I know one of the topics that we'll probably hit on many times throughout this webinar is the question of equity and access. And so I know that sharing these resources and trying to think about arcs of writing instruction means that we are also trying to acknowledge many different situations in which our students find themselves in terms of the levels of technology they have, broadband internet, family lives and work schedules, all kinds of things that we need to be considerate of. And I would invite questions and comments along those ways. And I would also invite us to think about how technologies are in and of themselves ideological. There is no neutral technology out there. And so we want to be thoughtful about the ways in which we describe and use technologies and the teaching moves that we make with them. So with that, we're going to start getting to some of the interactive portions. I apologize. I've been trying to turn off notifications on my iPad. At least it's as quiet as I can get it right now. But if a few little bells keep going off, I do apologize for that. I think by now everyone has gotten the link, but if you need it, I'm dropping it into the Zoom chat one more time, and hopefully our colleagues on YouTube Live can drop it in there as well. And all the materials, again, all the links, all of the types of things that we're going to be doing today, you'll be able to access from that document. So here is our moment of first interaction. I would invite you on Pear Deck to share where it is you are joining in from today. If you would like, go ahead and pick a color of the dot that you would like to use. Probably make sure you're using that pencil or paintbrush tool rather than the text typing tool. We'll try that a little bit later. But if you want to go ahead and just try to drop a dot where you're at, what I can see on my teacher panel is that currently I've got about 140 of you that are dropping in. This is great. I'm kind of going to get our screen ready to share because I can, in a moment, share where everyone is joining from today. So again, what I'm trying to model for you with the use of Pear Deck are all the different types of features that it has, moments where we might be able to pause and invite our students to engage in different kind of interactivity. And this one's pretty quick. It's just a, hey, tell us where you're joining from today. And I'll pull that up here on screen. We've got just over 400 of you that have chimed in. And so let me broadcast that really quickly to show those responses. And we'll see where most of us are coming in from. All right, so it looks like we have a vast majority of people joining from North America today. It also looks like we have people joining in from Africa, from Asia, from South America. Looks like we've got people joining in from a number of different places. And it's taking just a moment to load, but there it is. We can kind of see where is it that everyone is joining us from today. And it's great to have so many of you from around the world. And we have someone in the chat who needs the link to Pear Deck again. So Janelle, if you're able to drop that link in there, if you're just joining us now, you are going to be using this code. You're going to go to joinpd.com, and then you're going to put in XNTUN. That is the code to join for today. So I'll leave that up for just a moment. And again, what's cool is that we can now see in the background all the places where people are joining. Just so you get a little more familiar with Pear Deck, there are a couple interactive features that we're going to use, and I'm going to have you sliding and selecting some different options. Later, there will be some text options and multiple choice options, but I'd like you to think strategically about how you could use a tool like this to continually engage your students throughout the process. So again, Janelle, I'm going to trust that you're able to help the folks in the chat room that might need to get back into Pear Deck, and we're going to keep moving forward. So our guiding questions for today and what we're here for, why we're here, what it is that we're trying to think about. And I know here in Michigan, quite literally just yesterday, the governor released the guidelines for the state about when and how schools could open with certain safety procedures and so forth. The idea is that we're not sure. We may be back in school for a few days, a few weeks. We may have to come out of school as the winter sets in here in North America and in other seasons and other places around the world. So we want to think, how are we going to stretch and shape and morph and move all of the different things that we're thinking about when it comes to any arc of writing instruction. And when it comes to what we're doing with students on any given day, whether we're in the classroom with them, whether we're in a virtual classroom with them, whether we're recording a screencast to share with them, whether we're giving them feedback, either synchronously or asynchronously, we're trying to think about all the different ways in which good writing instruction can still be done in remote environments. So our three guiding questions here: what holds true? What are the principles of good writing instruction that are going to hold true, whether we're face-to-face, whether we're online, or whether we're in some kind of hybrid mode? What are the patterns of writing and response and revision that will also work? What is it that we can accomplish in a day, in a week, in a month? Again, whether we are face-to-face, online, or hybrid in some way, shape, or form in between. And then last but not least, and actually it's kind of odd because this is where we're going to start our conversation for the first hour or so, and then we're going to move back again to these bigger points. What are the tools that can help us? What are the tools that we can use to actually teach writing? What are the tools that we can use to build community with our writers? And how might we expand their opportunities into new and different ways? So what we're going to try now, it seems like every time I shift in Pear Deck, it makes a shift on the YouTube stream or on YouTube or on Zoom. So I'll just pause my screen sharing periodically and jump back into it. But we are going to quickly take a moment for some writing. Much like we do in almost all National Writing Project events that I think I have ever attended, I am going to invite you to take a few moments to write. I invite you to think about the reasons why you're here in this webinar right now. What questions are you bringing to the conversation today? And in what way are you thinking? What are you thinking about as you're looking forward to next year? So I am intentionally going to be silent for about 60 to 90 seconds to let people have a little bit of quiet time to write and respond. If you're in the Zoom call, you can also put this in the chat, but also we're doing it this way so those who are in Zoom as well as those who are on the YouTube Live can all participate in the Pear Deck conversation. So I'm going to be silent for about a minute or so and see what you all have to say. Right, so as I mentioned, I'm going to give you just a few more moments to write something either in Pear Deck, or if you're in Zoom, go ahead and feel free to drop it in the chat. We'll take about another 20 seconds or so. All right, so as we're getting ready to come back together here, now again, if we were in a classroom and I was walking around and kind of sitting down and going shoulder to shoulder and listening and hearing what people were saying, that's one way to do it. And of course, those who are in the chat room are able to see something and watch all this unfold. And wow, there's some great stuff in here. I am hoping, Janelle, that we saved the chat because there are some great ideas already emerging. But one of the nice things about Pear Deck, again, is that I can show responses. And I've been kind of monitoring in my teacher dashboard over here what's going on. And of course, if there was a response that I did not think would be appropriate to share on screen, I have a function where I can say I'm going to hide those responses. But I think the first few that are up here look pretty good. And so knowing that you're all anonymous anyway, I have a bunch of seals and eagles and wolves and iguanas and others who have joined in. I'm going to see if this is going to actually display. It seems to be there's a little more of a lag here with Pear Deck than what I would have expected. But it's really great because we've got about 180 of you who have been writing some responses on Pear Deck. And so we'll see what we get here. Let me try to stop share and reshare one more time. We'll see if we can get that refreshed. But again, questions about how to scaffold students' thinking, how to introduce them to engaging tools, how to get them to be responsive to one another, as well as to take my feedback or teacher feedback and incorporate it. We're going to talk about a lot of these things and think about a number of these different tools. So, all right, well, for whatever reason, as I am hoping that it would have shared, it's not at the moment. I don't know why that one won't quite come up on screen, but I'm going to ask for one more interactive here. I don't want to dwell on it for too much longer because we want to get on to talk about all these techniques and tools that we can use. I thought as a way to kind of then move out of this writing prompt, but move into a further discussion, just so I can have a sense of who you are and kind of what you're thinking, I would now ask you to do a quick little temperature check. So on your Pear Deck screen right now, you should see a bar that says, all right, here's where I'm at. How am I feeling? And what is it that I am thinking about as I'm thinking about remote writing instruction next year? So hopefully you're able to get that in there, and hopefully my slides return in the way that I want them to. Let me get that join code back up again. And you know what? For the moment, Pear Deck seems to have frozen, but this is part of teaching and learning online. So you know what? I'm going to push us into the Google Slides. And when it's appropriate, I'm going to try to bring us back to Pear Deck. But for right now, let's go into the slides. And again, you have all these links available to you in your link from the digital handout today. And you can force that copy of the slides too. Let's get started talking about principles. Let's think about what it is we want our students to know and be able to do. Let's think about what it is we want our students to engage with. And I direct you to one more document from the National Council of Teachers of English about their most recent statement in terms of teaching digital literacies. And for many years, dating back to the media literacy work in the 70s, all the way up to right now, NCTE has been on the forefront of talking about what it means to be literate in multiple contexts. And so as we think about the writing technologies that we might be using, we have a number of different tools that are there, but we also want to think about how we get students to be connecting those literacies, to make them interactive, to make sure that we are engaging them in thoughtful, productive ways. So I start with that statement and encourage you to visit the National Council of Teachers of English website so you have that available. All right, there's the digital handout if anyone needs that again. All right, so we are going to now think about the rest of looking at these tools through a lens offered by Dr. Steve Graham. Dr. Graham's an esteemed scholar in writing studies who does meta-analyses looking across multiple studies. He's also a co-principal investigator at the Wright Center along with Dr. Booth Olson. And one of the things that he's done in the last a little over a decade or so, he created the Writing Next report, and then he created two practice guides for IES and the What Works Clearinghouse. And what he did last fall at the International Literacy Association was to summarize all of his do's and don'ts of writing instruction into 11 kind of top level quick tips. And so I'm just going to kind of move through these quickly, but then we're going to cycle back on them and dig a little bit deeper and think about the tools that might be available. All right, we'll post that and link in the chat for you one more time. So Dr. Graham says that students should write for multiple audiences and purposes, that teachers should make intentional connections between reading and writing instruction, that we should ask students to write about material they're learning in a writing to learn format. We should be teaching students strategies for engaging in the writing process, not just giving them an assignment, but actually walking them through and scaffolding them, which connects over to point 7, which then we would think about how we help students express their written communication in different ways, many of which I would argue could be multimodal. We want to think about the intentional construction of sentences. How do we help students move through a process where they are engaged in sentence combining activities and thinking about how to use shorter sentences, longer sentences, compound and complex sentences. We want to think about ways that, as he argued in the speech last fall, we can really get them to learn touch typing. But I am also going to suggest that we think about ways we could get students to use voice dictation. And so I'll come back to that a little bit later on. We want to help students become more motivated and provide opportunities and outlets for them to share their writing. We certainly need to figure out ways to assess writing. And if we are in fact assigning more writing than we could ever possibly assess, as Kelly Gallagher reminds us, then we're going to want to think about the tools we have available, the affordances and limitations of those tools. We're also going to want to use 21st century writing tools, which we'll get back to throughout all of the talk today. And then we're going to want to establish a supportive class and thinking about building that classroom community. How is it that we are able to connect and have our students connect and engage across a number of different forms of media, both written, like through discussion forums, but also through voice and video and synchronous communication, such as Zoom, Google Meet, WebEx meetings, those types of things. So with Dr. Graham's approach, one of the things I was going to have you do, we're going to skip this for now. I was going to have you kind of generally say, do you agree or disagree with his principles as a whole? We're skipping that in Pear Deck for the moment. But I also want to make a connection to another mentor and colleague, Dr. David Kirkland. At that address last fall, Dr. Graham opened and Dr. Kirkland ended. And one of the things that Dr. Kirkland does very well is reminds us of the needs of culturally responsive pedagogy. How is it that we are making sure that we are addressing students' linguistic needs, addressing their needs from a socio-emotional standpoint, recognizing the funds of knowledge that they bring? And if you'll recall from a moment ago, as I said, the idea here is that we have a number of technologies that are available to us and to our students, and yet at the same time, no technology is neutral. Every technology comes with a certain set of ideological practices that are built into it, and thinking about the ways in which we might use that technology is important, because we can take technologies that are intended for one use and potentially use them in a slightly different way. So with that in mind, and knowing that you'll hear again from Dr. Kirkland later this fall, and that you could go back to Dr. Graham's webinar from earlier this spring, I'm going to pause for just a moment to see if we can get Pear Deck working again, see if Janelle sees anything coming up in the chat room that we might need to address before I launch in, because I know when I start talking about tools, I'm going to get really excited and go really quickly. So Janelle, can you let me know, are there some things coming up in the chat, anything we might need to address?
I'm just monitoring the chat right now. It looks like people are loving Pear Deck.
Okay. Well, that's good. That's good. And there was one question about grade levels that this webinar is for. I would typically say that my area of focus is at the upper elementary into the secondary and college level. That's not to say that you couldn't use some of these tools and strategies with a different audience of earlier childhood students, but we're going to have to kind of take and adapt and recognize that there are many different ways in which we could use these tools across different grade levels. All right, well, my Pear Deck for some reason is just still not loading up. So I'm going to kind of pause on that for a moment. And I apologize that we're not using it in quite the way that I had wanted to. I'm going to try to reload it here in a minute. But for now, because this next middle part of the webinar, I can kind of present some of the same tools. Yeah, feel free to just go ahead and hit refresh. I had to stop my session. I so apologize for that. I'm just going to go ahead and click end on my session. And even though Pear Deck says that we can have hundreds of people, sometimes the best laid plans with technology just don't quite work out the way we had hoped that they would. All right, so let me go back into present mode and we will get things going again here with the Google Slides. And again, all these resources, not only are they links in the Google Slides, they are also links on that digital handout that I've provided too. Janelle, are we good with the slides back up on screen?
Yes, we are.
All right, perfect. Well, let me jump in. So one thing I will say, I'm monitoring the Zoom chat, and Janelle, you're going to help me. I know that I get going really fast when I start talking about tools and the opportunity to use different tools. So if I get going too fast and you see there are questions, let me know. But also know that we'll have some Q&A time available at the end where we can go back into any of these tools and talk a bit more about them. So we are going to start by thinking about ways that we can have our students engaged in a number of different opportunities to write for different purposes and audiences. So I think my screen sharing just went a little bit goofy there. Let me try that one more time. There we go. All right. So when we're inviting our students to write for multiple purposes and audiences, we want to be thinking about all the ways in which we might engage them. And here, not only am I thinking about audiences inside our own classrooms, like their peers, or to slightly extend the classroom to their parents and caregivers, I want to think about audience in terms of how we might take written text and transform it as well. So on this slide, on the one hand, we could think about audience just in the who are we presenting to? But I also want us to think about the how. In what ways are we sharing this information and doing something more robust, compelling? I don't want to say more interesting necessarily, because I think writing and putting words into sentences and sentences into paragraphs and paragraphs into essays is an absolutely essential skill. I've argued that my whole career. I argue that for my own children and all children. So it's not an either or, it's a both and. So it's the, yes, we want you to write a thesis statement and bring in evidence, and we want you to be able to write that essay. And we also want you to be thinking about how you can represent those ideas through different forms of media. So here on this screen, I have just a couple tools to begin thinking about. Adobe Spark is one that is available through your school or district. If your IT director signs up, there's a special way to go through and go to the Adobe Spark, spark.adobe.com/edu, and your tech director can call a number and get your whole district signed up for the premium package of Adobe Spark. So I'd highly recommend that for you. Even though you could have students create personal accounts, there are options for doing that. That allows you to make posts, pages, and also videos. So posts are like social media graphics, pages are full-on websites, videos, as they would imply, can be anywhere from just a few seconds to a few minutes long. And one of the activities I like to see students do within Adobe Spark type of mode is like, what's your big idea for your essay, and how would you like condense that into just a social media post? What's the image you would choose? What's the font? What's the color scheme? But then how might you represent your idea in a full web page? And then how might you represent your idea creating a video? And so I think one of the cool things you can do with Adobe Spark is because it has those 3 tools in one, you can have students think about their ideas and how to represent them in different ways. And I really do think for Spark in particular, young children, even probably as young as first or second grade, could probably navigate the tools in Adobe Spark with just a little bit of practice. And certainly by middle school and high school, they'd be able to use those as well. A few other things on this page. Canva also allows you to do a lot with social media type graphics, infographics. Infogram and Pictochart and some of the other tools that are intentionally designed as infographic creation tools, I really think we have to focus on the info part of the infographic. Where is it that we might collaborate with our math and science and social studies colleagues to have students gather existing data, or to take the data that they might find through their own surveys or other mechanisms, integrate that into an actual graphic where they can build and manipulate their data in Google Sheets or Excel or within Infogram or Pictochart, and then represent that data and build an argument through that infographic. I think there's some really interesting cross-disciplinary possibilities there. Audacity, I've already seen in the chat. Some people have used that for recording. There are a number of different recording tools, and I know Audacity doesn't work on Chrome. For instance, there's Twisted Wave. Also, you could always have students just record audio files, use a tool perhaps like Vocaroo. So there are different ways to get those audio files, but yes, having them create podcasts. And NPR has a whole curriculum available through the NPR Student Podcast Challenge. Timeline.js is one of many tools from the Knight Lab School of Journalism. And again, it allows you to create a multimedia representation. You're having students do a report, trying to explain something, look at something chronologically. They could build that and it integrates with Google Sheets. And then finally, Book Creator is an app that is both available on the web as well as an app for iPads or other devices. And that will allow students, as the name suggests, to create their own digital books, which can be distributed digitally and also be printed as well. So before we move on, Janelle, anything you're seeing in the chat or from the YouTube stream that we might want to address quickly?
Nothing right now, but I'll get back to you.
Good. All right. Yeah. Storyboard, that has been mentioned in the Google or in the Zoom chat. Anchor for podcasting has been mentioned as well. Yes, definitely good ideas for those apps too. Always more apps than we have time to explore. All right. For connecting reading and writing instruction, a few things that I like to think about here. One is, I know there are many popular tools for reading that come with pretty hefty subscription costs. So I try to point to a few here that are available for free that also do leveled Lexile-based reading. One is Tween Tribune, sponsored by the Smithsonian, and they put out topical, timely articles about nonfiction topics ranging across a number of different interest areas. And similarly, ReadWorks does this type of work too. I personally have not explored ReadWorks a lot, but I know that it is definitely one that's available. Yep, Common Lit is another one. And then someone mentioned Actively Learn. So these, when we're looking for those kind of article of the week type style pieces, and then we can think about how we will annotate them and do some fun things with them. We'll get to those when we talk about Cami and Edgy in just a moment. Those are two sites that you can go to and grab things for free. In the middle column there are two sites that I think are intentionally interesting for thinking about how to invite students into academic argument. And with the idea of argumentative writing, we don't just want to plop students in and say, well, what do you think? And have them develop their thesis and go from there. And this will connect to one of the arcs of instruction I'll share later on. What we want them to do is understand the whole conversation. And All Sides and Kialo EDU do a pretty nice job of helping students situate themselves and see where they're at and what they might be thinking in relation to others. And we're going to explore All Sides in a little while, so I'll come back to that. But Kialo also has a main Kialo site and then an EDU site. So you might want to just kind of explore both and see which one would be more useful for your students at the age level they're at. in the last column here, we have 2 tools for annotation. Now, I know many teachers will copy and paste things into Google Docs and use Google Docs itself as a tool for annotation. And I certainly agree that that can be useful. And maybe that's the best solution for you. Both of the tools that I share here, Kami and Edgy, are freemium. You have a certain amount that you can use for free, and then you'd have to pay. But they allow for some more robust types of editing and annotation, and they allow for annotation on PDFs. So if you think you're going to integrate annotation and scaffolded discussion around texts into your reading and writing instruction, I would really encourage you to look at Kami and Edgy as some possibilities for annotation tools. But again, you could always have students go back to any one of these other websites, copy a core text, you know, turn on reader view and get just the clean text without all the ads and everything like that. And then you could take that and then you could put that in a Google Doc, or they could put it in a Google Doc and they could have their threaded discussion there. Lots of other different tools being mentioned in the chat here, including Is It, Hypothesis, Perusal. Yep, a whole bunch of great things that are out there. And I hope we're capturing all of these so we can put them on the website, and maybe people are tweeting about them as well.
Troy, we do have an interesting question coming in from the webinar Q&A. And the question is, how many digital platforms are too many for a typical student to be able to navigate?
Good question. So it's interesting. When I think about what I would be doing if I were at the elementary level, and again, I'm probably more thinking along upper elementary level, I would say you'd probably want to pick 5 or 6 core tools and stick with them and use them in a number of different creative ways throughout the whole school year. If I was at the middle school level, maybe 6 to 8 core tools and use them creatively over the whole year. High school level, 8 to 10 at most, maybe not even 10. And for me, when I teach college classes, for my freshman writing class, for instance, I give students choices. There are some core tools that we use together, but then I let them pick and choose a little bit. So like they want to create a podcast, they're going to go learn about Audacity. They want to create a video, they're going to go learn about iMovie or WeVideo. So I do give them some choices there. But yeah, I think that using a smaller, more focused number of tools, but using those tools in multiple creative ways is really powerful. All right. Well, we're going to keep moving on, share some more tools here. And again, connecting back to these bigger themes presented by Dr. Graham as we think about successful writing instruction and the principles of successful writing instruction. We want students to write to learn. We've known this for quite some time. We know that we want them to fully engage and be active, processing, critical thinking, questioning, all those types of things. And so what I've shared in this next set of slides are just a few resources. Now, most of these are actually just like prompts and questions and tips and tricks. So like if you were to look over at like the Edutopia article or the Teach Thought article, 2 sources that provide a number of different resources for free available. Those are just 2 articles that have some great critical thinking, questioning prompts. And I mention those here also because we can be strategic as educators and subscribe to newsletters of organizations that provide us with great prompts and materials, such as Edutopia and Teach Thought. So this is like a professional learning moment as much as it is a technology moment. Think strategically about the organizations that if you're not already subscribed to their newsletter, you might want to subscribe to their newsletter and set a filter so it doesn't go off into your spam folder. And really hone your own practice and think about where am I going to get fed as a teacher. So those were 2 that I wanted to mention for that reason, as well as those 2 particular articles, which just give some great prompts that, again, students could copy and paste those prompts into a Google Doc and use them as guides for their thinking. Back over on the other side of the slide with the graphic organizers and wise mapping, that is a link out to Matt Miller's Ditch That Textbook website. He puts a number of different templates out there that are available. This particular link takes you to some that are available in Google Drawing. So again, you could create like a fishbone ladder, a cause and effect, a Venn diagram, make a copy of that, and then push that out to your students, and then they can use that as a place to write and think. and then they transfer and they start to think about that as they move into their more formal writing in a regular word processing document. The WISE mapping I include because that is a free and web-based tool for mind mapping. I know there are a number of tools that we can download and that have a cost. Some are freemium, some are just more expensive, but WISE mapping is free and available online, and it has some collaborative features that you might be able to engage your students in using too. So I'm dropping the link to all the handouts and everything in the chat room again for the people that just joined in. The one over here in the middle, the writing to learn strategies, again, these are just links to a few different, I think there are a dozen strategies there, pretty popular. Any Google search is probably going to bring up 24 different ways or templates that you could use those strategies. But then my encouragement to you is, again, think about how you could take one of those strategies, build it into a Google Doc that could be shared. Sometimes students do these strategies alone. Sometimes they might just do it with one partner. Sometimes they might do it with a small group. How can you be creative in taking those strategies and adapting them and sharing them and having students collaborate in different ways? And then for the sentence templates I mentioned there come out of a book called They Say, I Say. And They Say, I Say was written by two college English professors, Gerald Graff and Kathy Birkenstein. Is very popular in freshman composition courses and even at the high school level now. And what's happened here for this Google Doc is that through the magic of fair use and the interwebs, a colleague of mine from here in Michigan, Dave Stewart Jr., took all of the sentence templates from the Graff and Birkenstein text and put them into one Google Doc, which you could copy and then you could share with your students. So they could just have that kind of waiting for themselves in their Google Drive. And again, you'll notice from the activity that I'm going to share later, I use some of the sentence templates to be able to structure the activity and have students engage in some writing. All right, so before I move on, Janelle, any questions that have come up in the chat or through the YouTube live stream?
Nothing right now. We are continuing to share the link for the handout as well as these slides as folks perhaps join us a little bit after the time that we've started.
Okay. And yes, in the chat, the link is embedded in the Google Doc and the slide deck. Everything that you do, everything we're sharing today is all in those two documents. So you should have multiple ways to access those links. And I would, wow, I could get into another whole half-hour conversation there about this. I do not think that templates lead to formulaic writing if used strategically. That's my short answer to the question. And I've used them with middle school kids, high school kids, college students, graduate students. I even have a sentence template that I use to get students started on writing their doctoral thesis or dissertation. So I think sentence templates are very powerful and can be used in many strategic ways. All right, so how do we help students regulate the writing process? We know that having students pause to reflect on what they're doing and make sure that they're taking the time that they need really matters. And so a couple of these tools are ones that will help them kind of actually document their process. A couple are to help them just be intentional while they're working. And then the ones on the other side are to document their sources. So let's start with DraftBack and Writable. DraftBack is a plugin for Google Docs. And basically what it does is it just takes a snapshot every time your Google Doc gets revised. And then you can click play and you can actually watch a video of the whole Google Doc kind of unfolding and being revised. And I think what's really powerful about that is you could have students go back and watch their process unfold. You could even have them record a quick note, almost like a director's cut, like, oh, here I was working on my thesis, but then I got stuck and then I had to go do this. So it could be really powerful to use a tool like that to just watch as you look at their Google Docs or to have them reflect on it. Writable is an app. I will, in interest of full disclosure, tell you that I'm an academic advisor for Writable and have consulted for them. But I think it's a very powerful tool and useful to think about in terms of all the different ways that you can scaffold the writing process and engage students in peer review. And in particular, it kind of saves iterations of their documents. And so it syncs up with their Google Docs, but then in Writable, they can go back and look at the revision suggestions from peers and from you as a teacher, and they can iterate on those and demonstrate the changes that they've made. In the middle column, just some strategies. We have to teach kids how to be focused. Like, we have devices dinging at us all the time. We have to have moments to learn how to use do not disturb and set timers. So I really strongly encourage us to think about all the different types of extensions and apps that we can use. So Pomodoro timers, again, maybe 25 minutes is a little too long for a fourth grader. Maybe we want them to set a 10-minute writing timer. That would be one way to think about it. But we can also encourage them to set timers of different lengths for different tasks. So there are many out there, some that build into Google Chrome, or you could always just use the timer on your device. Stay focused. Yes, I agree. Somewhere there's lots of different things that are available to use. Stay focused is one of them. There's block sites. There's a number of different tools that are out there. But again, you can kind of whitelist or blacklist different websites so you stay focused. I'm not going to go to Facebook. I'm not going to go to Twitter. I'm not going to go to YouTube, and set timers for those. So those types of things are things that you could help invite students to engage with in setting their own purpose and how they're going to use their tools. I'm afraid I have not used Smart Compose. So maybe if you could share a link to that, I will try to check it out. Thank you. And draft back. Oh, we're gonna have to double check on that because I just took that screenshot the other day and it was good. So I'm afraid if it got lost, we'll have to double check. In the final column there, I just note two different tools that we could use to help students document their sources. One of the things that we know is super challenging for writers is that they say, oh, I found it on Google. Well, you found it on Google, but that's not where that document lives online. That document has a home. It came from a different website. And we want you to think about where you got your information from. So Wisdom, and I haven't personally tried it yet, but I know it integrates with Google Docs and it seems like it's kind of interesting, is an automated citation tool that you can build in. And as you're on a website, you can click it and it will gather that metadata and save it. But the other one that I like is ZBib. So in contrast to some of the other tools that you only have a limited amount of citations or there are lots of advertisements on the site, ZBib is completely free and openly available. It's created by the folks at Zotero out of George Mason's University and one of their centers there. And what it will allow you to do, you can kind of see in that bar in the center, like if you have a URL or if you have a DOI or if you have a link to a book on Amazon or if you have a link to a video on YouTube, you can put that in there and then it will try to gather as much of the metadata from that particular website. But what's also cool is that you can go in and you can have students, once they got their initial entry, click, and then there's all kinds of space where they can add additional information. And I like these bibliography generators, not only because they save time, but also because then students can really go in and see what is all the kinds of information that I should potentially be gathering from different sites, author, date, when it was created, so on and so forth. You know, there are different things, and my point to the message in the chat is that they are going to probably have errors. And this is the opportunity for students then to go back and have the metadata in their bibliography and go back to the site and say, oh, wait, it got the author's first name and last name transposed, or, oh, it didn't get the full URL, or, oh, it didn't get the date published. So I actually think it's really a way for them to think deeply about their sources. And there are a number that have been mentioned in the chat. Again, a lot are commercially available or have advertisements on them. That's why I'm recommending ZBib. And again, I personally haven't played with Wisdom all that much. It appears to be free and integrates with Google Docs, but I would encourage people to try it out. And no, I don't think the Purdue OWL has an extension, but again, that would be the place where I would tell kids. So you've generated your automatic bibliography. Now let's go and make sure that everything is kind of lining up, and are all the periods and commas and capital letters and things appropriately done. All right. So teaching sentence construction skills. The two tools I want to share here are actually both kind of digital cork boards. And I share these tools here because I think they're pretty powerful in terms of what you could ask students to do and to play with. And so because I'm not in the Pear Deck anymore, I'm actually going to open up that Padlet one and show it to you live and interactive here. So sentence combining, as we know, is just that act of taking any particular short sentences and pulling them apart and pushing them together and trying to make them work in different ways. In that whole process, we're trying to teach them ways that they can use conjunctions and transitions and organization. We're teaching them about active versus passive voice. And so this article, or this example, is built off of my colleague and mentor Jim Burke's article, Teaching Textual Intelligence Through Grammar, which I think is linked in the digital handout. And he has an example of a student, Spike, who works at Happy Dog shoe stores in San Francisco. And one of the things I like to do, and why I like Padlet or a tool like Pinup or some other corkboard style activity for this, is yes, we could have students type out their sentences and play with them, but the actual act of moving things around a little bit and thinking about, well, what do we want? Do we want to mention that Spike, a junior from San Francisco State, is working at Happy Dog shoe store? Or do we want to say a junior working at Happy Dog shoe store, Spike, is also doing such and such? And what I have students do is I say, you're going to make multiple versions of your sentence combining. You're going to not only make the simple, most effective, probably the most obvious form of the sentence combining, but I want you to make sure that you have Spike in the subject position of the sentence, but I also want to make sure that you put something else in the subject area of the sentence. And I want you to think about how you might use transitions. And maybe, just maybe, you need to add something else. Maybe you need a transition, like also, and you'd want to put that in. And maybe it's going to be after you use a semicolon or something like that. So they use these walls, and they're able to manipulate and move things around and play a little bit. And then what I think is especially cool, and this is where it can become a little more grammatical and getting them working with it, is you can have them say like, okay, now tell me why you did this. So why did you put Spike in the subject position in this sentence? So for this sentence, we put Spike in the subject position because, and they have to articulate why they made the authorial choice that they did in that sentence combining exercise. So again, Padlet is one of those tools that you might be able to use for that. The other one, though the name is slightly unfortunate, I wish that maybe it wasn't called Pinup, but maybe our kids are too young to really even think about the fact that that could have some negative connotations. There's lots of different things that you could try there. I'm going to try to restart the lesson because this is the moment where I'd be asking for a little bit of input. Let's see if Pear Deck's going to cooperate. But Janelle, can you tell me what's coming up in the chat? And if Pear Deck doesn't cooperate really quickly, I'm just going to keep moving on with the Google Slides.
Troy, it's actually Tamara. Several people are asking about privacy and how you know whether these tools are safe for use in schools and students. Do you have any recommended places to check that?
I actually do. Yeah, this is a great question. And hey, it looks like Pear Deck might cooperate with us again. So let's all try to join back into Pear Deck here, and I will answer that question momentarily, Tamara. So again, the new code, you might have to hit refresh on your joinpd.com. The new code is IGCND. So let's see if we can get that going. Let's see how that's going to work for us this time. Let's hope that this is going to work again, and maybe we're not going to crash Pear Deck this time. But Tamara, your question is a great one that's come up from the chat. The one place that I would always go to is the Student Privacy Pledge. And if you go to the Student Privacy Pledge homepage, you can look at all the signatories to the Student Privacy Pledge. And you can see them like in a grid format, but you can also just see them in a list format. So for instance, if I just wanted to search for Padlet, I can go in here and I can see, oh, they have not signed on to the Student Privacy Pledge. So I might want to be thinking about that. Or again, I can do Writable because I know they've signed on. I can search and find Writable. The other place that I really appreciate, and I think I have linked later on, are Common Sense Media EdTech reviews. So if you go to the EdTech reviews in Common Sense Media, they also discuss privacy in their reviews. They're pretty intentional about that. So you can click into any one review and you can read a little bit more about the tools and some of any concerns they might have about privacy. All right, well, let's see if we're going to be able to try this. All right, we're going to go in. We're going to see what's going to happen. We'll try this one more time. Any other questions from the chat that seem to be popping up? Good. All right, so I'm going to pull the chat room open for Zoom again, make sure it's going well. So again, if you're just trying out again to get into Pear Deck, that new code is I as in iguana, G as in girl, C as in candy, N as in Nancy, D as in dog, and that will stay up there in that upper corner. All right, so we want to also teach our students how to be typers, but we also have times where we might invite them to use voice dictation. And so I was hoping I could get Pear Deck working again at this point to see how do we all feel about voice to text dictation as a teaching tool? Like, do we feel like it's appropriate and useful? Do we feel like, I'm not so sure one way or the other? Do we feel like, it's kind of cheating to let my students do that? And I'll try to share the results here in just a minute. Let's see if this is going to cooperate with us, and we'll actually try to demonstrate what Pear Deck would look like so you're able to see those responses too. Hopefully that will come up again here in just a moment. And I'm getting many hundreds of you logging back into Pear Deck. Thanks for being patient with us and trying this out. So I'm going to try to show them one more time, and we'll see if my teacher dashboard is going to cooperate. If not, what I would tell you is that on my heat map here, we've got about, 40% of you on the good. We got about 40% of you on the middle, and we got about 20% of you over here saying, I don't know if I want my students using voice to text. So here's the point that I would make about that. And I'm sorry, it just seems like Pear Deck, maybe they say we can have a whole bunch of people, but it's just not syncing up and cooperating right now. So I'm going to move on to the next slide and kind of talk a little bit about voice to text dictation. And the goal here being that I would hope that we would be thinking strategically about when, why, and how we would use voice to text dictation. So if we are going to use it and we want to think about what we're asking students to do, sometimes we want them to put pen to paper and we want them to actually put words on a page in their journal. But then do we want them to spend hours just transcribing from their journal? Or might that be a time where we could invite them to use voice to text, where they could get that in there? And it's not going to be perfect, and that's okay, because that then invites them to go back and edit and revise and again, be more strategic about it. So I think that there are opportunities, maybe rough draft thinking, or, again, just taking what I have on a written page and making it digital. We can teach them some strategies for trying to be writers at that higher level, inserting punctuation and things like that. But I would say, as a writer myself who uses voice to text and having watched students use voice to text, I don't think we'd ever want a final draft from voice to text to final draft without any editing and revision. That would be a little difficult here. So, all right, well, you know what? You all have been really patient with me, and I really appreciate that you're doing this. But I'm just going to end Pear Deck again. It's just not working quite the way I wanted it to. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe it will. I should wait one more moment. We'll see. You can see where all the bubbles have showed up there. But yeah, I want to be able to move through the slides and not completely bog us down. So I'm going to go back over to my slide deck and we'll share from there. All right. So with that in mind, let's get back into the main slide deck sharing. And we'll go.
Roy, we do have an interesting question about your back end right now. Just wondering, do you have two screens open at this moment? How are you navigating both Pear Deck and the other things that you're doing on your end?
That's a good question. So again, I actually have my slide deck up so I can see, oh, hey, whoop, Teach Typing and Voice Dictation finally showed up on screen like I would have hoped it would have with Pear Deck. So maybe we'll go back. I actually have a dual monitor set up here. So I'm talking to you and kind of running my PowerPoint here. And over on this monitor, I have the little teacher pop-out panel for Pear Deck. So I can see what slides I'm on and so forth. So maybe we're back in business with Pear Deck. Let's see if that's going to work. No. All right. I apologize. This is the thing we do. We take risks. We try. Pear Deck's worked for me in smaller group settings. It says it can have hundreds to thousands. Maybe we're finding out that it just can't quite do that right at the moment. So I apologize. We'll do the things we need to do in Google Slides. All right, so I'm going to get back into slide mode, talk a little bit about voice to text and touch typing. A couple of the tools that I know are available out there, free or freemium, are Dictanote and Speech Notes. And then Google Docs, of course, has a voice typing tool in there as well. So again, I strongly encourage us to have our students do rough draft thinking or do just pure transcription from written to screen. But voice dictation is not going to solve all our problems as writing teachers, but it is certainly worth exploring and inviting our students to explore as well. All right, we want students to be engaged in scaffolded instruction, and I'm closing out Pear Deck again. Again, thank you all for being good sports about this, and I'm really sorry it's not quite working the way we had hoped it to, but that's what happens with technology, and we drop 5 and we punt and we keep moving forward. So scaffolding instruction. What are the things that we need and want to do with that? Well, there are some different tools that we can use, and I've kind of put them over in the left column, some places to go. We have already talked a little bit about common sense, so I won't spend too long on that. But the other place is that the CAS Center has a number of universally designed lessons available out there, openly available for free. And so when we think about the design of our instruction, especially in remote learning, we want to give kids multiple opportunities to express themselves and to try to engage with the material. Probably one of the most popular things that have come out, and in all good ways, in the past few months is this idea of like a choice board. Like here are, they've been around for a while, but now people are turning them into hyperdocs and putting them on Google Slides or Google Docs, pushing them out to kids saying, here's your choice board for this week, do 4 of the 12 or 3 of the 9 activities, 1 at each level. So they're getting more robust. And then they're having students express themselves and share through multimodal ways, which I think is really powerful too. So I really encourage you to check out the CAS UDL Exchange, think about how you might adapt those and turn those into hyperdocs and share them in many different ways. We've already talked about common sense reviews. The other thing with scaffolded instruction is providing students with the opportunity to have that feedback quickly. So Kaizena is a voice tool that you can embed into Google Docs. So that's really more for feedback. But then also, not only having us create screencasts for our students, but having students create screencasts where they share their thinking. So for instance, we might tell students, you're going to have this choice board, you're going to create 3 products this week. At the end of the week, you're going to use Screencastify, which the free version only has a 5-minute limit. And here are 4 questions I want you to answer at the end of the week in the form of a screencast. And you're going to walk me through, have your 4 tabs open, have your 3 tabs for your project open, and then answer these 4 questions. What was your overall goal? What did you learn most from product 1? What did you learn most from product 2? What did you learn most from product 3? And then at 5 minutes, it cuts them off. So you get that recording, they've done their reflection. And I think that in addition to creating high quality screencasts for students, we can invite them to record their own and send them back to us. Also, of course, another great use for screencasts is just using it as the tool to record feedback for students. So for instance, my students, master's students, teachers themselves, turned in a link to their professional portfolio. I pull that up on screen, I click record, I walk through, I click through the screen, tell them I've looked at the website once, and then I go back over it again, and I do that recording and point out the particular features and tie it to the rubric as well. Lots of other screencast tools being mentioned in the chat, like Loom and Moat. I have not tried that yet. New to me tool. Thank you very much for sharing that. And a few others that are mentioned there. Hopefully they're being mentioned in the YouTube chat as well. All right, we're going to keep moving forward here, thinking about how to get students to be more motivated. One of the things that I think about with motivation is what are the invitations that we offer, and then what are the opportunities that we provide to share. So on both ends, so as we get started and as we get ready to put the writing out into the world, what are the opportunities that are available? So over on the left here, we have 2 things to get some ideas and some inspiration. Of course, I would be remiss if I did not mention that the National Writing Project site, in addition to having many resources on the site itself, has the College Career and Community Writers, or the C3WP program, with a ton of free curriculum out there with writing prompts and ideas. So there is that. I knew I was going to say that. I wasn't even going to put it on screen, and hopefully my friend and colleague Tanya can drop the link to the C3WP in the chat room. But then the New York Times has a writing curriculum that's been made available for free. They have mentor texts. They also have a site where the idea, how do we include tools for, you know what I should do since I'm talking right now? I should turn on closed captions. There we go. Thank you for mentioning. I should have mentioned that right off the top. We can, in Google Slides and PowerPoint now, turn on closed captioning right in our presentation. So thank you for doing that. And also for accessibility, Kim, one of the things that I've tried to do is provide you with the slides ahead of time, as well as an additional handout that has all the links and tools available to you. So there you go. Hopefully that's helpful. I know I'm not perfect. I know I'm still learning how to be better at accessibility, but hopefully these are some tools that can be useful for you. New York Times curriculum, moving writers mentor text. You can go in. The New York Times also has a series where they've invited writers to kind of deconstruct how they put together their nonfiction pieces, which I think is really powerful. In the middle, we have some additional spaces for curriculum and community. 826 Digital is part of the 826 National Network. And what 826 has done here is provided a number of resources for writing prompts, but also places for students to publish and share. And then we have the Write About site. This is created by some educators in Michigan that allow students, you have a certain level of freemium access, and then you have a certain level that you would have to pay for to create your writing communities there. To start the captioning, I use the feature right here in Google Slides. And I'll use another feature really quickly. Since Pear Deck is not cooperating with me, I'll use this feature strategically, the laser pointer. For Get Underlined, that's a space much like Teen Ink where students can publish and share. So I would let you explore that on your own and figure out if that seems like a useful medium for you. And also a little more risque, but also I think still potentially useful, is DS 106 or Digital Stories 106. The idea with that is that they're trying to get students to produce multimedia texts. And so if you're especially interested in communities where students would publish their multimedia, you could take a look at DS 106. All right, now we get to that part of how do we assess students' writing and learning? How do we make sure that we are being intentional and thoughtful about the use of these tools? And I was, again, with Pear Deck working, going to ask you to think about automated feedback, but I'm just going to keep moving forward at this point and talk about some of the tools. So some of the things that are available, I've already told you a little bit about Writable, which does have an automatic revision assistant built in. A few other that I know teachers are using are add-ons for Google Documents, and that includes GradeProof and WriteQ, Jozu. These are tools that will kind of do like an automatic, grammar check, and they are, again, freemium. So you get a certain amount of, it will grade at a certain level, so to speak, where students can see their mistakes and make revisions. And you can even see here, especially GradeProof, like there's certain things that we'll look at for free, and then it will tell you, oh, and also if you upgrade to premium, we'll show you all these other places you could get revision suggestions as well. So those three are very similar in that manner. Then Doctopus and Orange Slice I mentioned because they allow you as the teacher to build rubrics and connect them in your Google Docs and think about how to build those rubrics and give students targeted feedback on the rubrics. And yes, Google Classroom has some rubric options available now. I admit I'm not a Google Classroom user, so I haven't tried that feature in Google Classroom, but I have had success in the past with Doctopus and Orange Slice. So all of this is just to say that there are many ways that we can build in automated feedback and assessment with our own feedback and assessment. And then we can use those other tools that were just mentioned, like Kaizena or recording voice messages. Even using a voice recorder like Vocaroo, you can put a comment on a student's document and then record yourself and give them a link to your voice recording. So there are lots of different things that we can do to ensure that students are getting feedback in a timely and efficient manner. Janelle, I see the chat is blowing up right now, so I'm going to pause for a moment. What have I missed or not addressed that's come up in the chat room?
Troy, one person has asked, how do I narrow down the different apps or platforms or tools that I might want to engage students with in the following year? And I wonder if you could speak to that question as it relates to essential questions or learning goals or focusing on connecting the use of tools to those greater learning opportunities that we want students to focus on.
Yeah, I really appreciate that question. And again, I'll echo one of the things I said earlier is that I would choose a certain set of core tools that can be used in critical and creative ways. So I'm going to pick on Google Docs because I'm guessing that most people on the webinar today are familiar with Google Docs. We know that it's pretty easy to make a Google Doc assignment and push it out. And we even know that it's pretty easy for students to collaborate on a Google Doc and to look at revisions. But what are the ways that we might tweak and change and use that just a little bit differently? So some of those are technical things. Like for instance, in Google Docs, you can, when you go up into the file menu, you can save a version and you can name a version. So I could say, before I turn in to Dr. Hicks on July 1st. And then Dr. Hicks is going to get into my paper and make some corrections, and then I'm going to add and change suggestions. And then I say, before I turn in final draft on July 5th. And even in that simple act of using that one little technology twist with Google Docs, we've added a pedagogical layer to it. We can also use Google Docs in a way where we might have students collaborate. Like we can use a protocol and give them a way to have a discussion. And maybe that's just with 2 students, maybe it's with 4 students, maybe it's with your whole class of students. Similarly, like I talked about earlier with Adobe Spark, how could you have students take one idea and try to represent it using both the posts, the pages, and the video tools, all within Adobe Spark? So they're working on one project, but then they have to represent it in a slightly different way, and it changes their thinking and the angle that they bring. So these are the types of questions I would ask about any one technology. And again, you're not going to use GradeProof, WriteQ, Jozu, and Orange Slice probably. That's too much to ask of you and your students. So you need to think about the tool and how can you use it in a robust and fluid manner. I hope that helps a little bit, and I'll talk a little bit more about this when I share my example to how I chose the tools that I did.
Troy, one additional question that's coming up in both the YouTube chat as well as our Q&A feature in Zoom webinar is how can teachers effectively and equitably use these tools to engage students asynchronously?
Mm-hmm. So again, I think that one of the good things about Google Chrome as a platform, and there are multiple blog posts about this, including from the Google blog itself, as well as from other educators. And I would encourage you to look at people who are Google experts like Casey Bell, John Sowash, Alice Keeler. There are a number of people out there that write about the types of apps and extensions that can be built into Google Chrome. So you're creating an instructional lesson and you know that your student is only going to be able to get online for a limited amount of time. Well, there are ways that you can build that lesson and even build in like your links to YouTube videos and things like that and the extensions. And I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but that kid is only going to be able to get to school or get to a restaurant where they're going to borrow Wi-Fi from or whatever. And they can if you have everything strategically planned out, and especially if you use something like a HyperDoc, like Lisa Highfill and Sarah Landis and their colleagues have created, they could download that one HyperDoc and all the media and all the links and everything they need for that week, and then they can work on it asynchronously. And I think that that's one thing we need to be very mindful of in this year ahead, as we think, something that might have normally just taken me a 45-minute class period is probably going to take a little bit longer at home, or it's going to be something that, they're going to need really explicit instructions. Like, hey, normally if we were in the classroom, I'd just hit play on this YouTube video. I know that your parents may not let you watch YouTube, or I know that you may not be able to find YouTube. So I've grabbed that video. I've used a clip grab type tool, and I've downloaded it as an MP4 file. And here's the link on my Google Drive. And you can drive up to the school, download that, and then go watch it later on in the week. So again, I think we've got to be really strategic about what we're asking students to do, as well as how we're asking them to do it over 1 day, 3 days, 5 days. That's going to be really important.
And so, Troy, we actually have a question that's kind of on the flip side of this asynchronous idea that you were just talking about. And that question is, how can I engage students for 45 to 60 minutes daily from a remote site? I want to be that teacher who is awesome at remote learning. And this comes from Susan from our live stream.
Oh, that's great. So can we put a pin on that question? Because I'm going to come to that really quickly. That's an excellent question. And what I hope I'm doing for Susan and others today is at least try. I was with Pear Deck, and hopefully it would work with your 25 or 40 or 50 students, do better than what I was doing with hundreds today. Set up my lecture in a way that it's designed for interactivity, but also we'll talk about synchronous meetings and some protocols and things like that. I'm going to fast forward just a little bit because we want to get to that question. My last point, connected back to Steve Graham, is that we want students to be able to compose multimodal text. So along the top row here, you've got 3 different kinds of video makers. WeVideo is web-based and freemium, and then OpenShot and Shotcut can both be downloaded on Macs, PC. So again, you have to determine by platform which one you're going to be able to use. But if you wanted to use something a little more sophisticated than the Adobe Spark Video Editor, you could have your students try out WeVideo. The Knight Lab School of Journalism has a number of tools. We already talked about Timeline, but it has tools like Juxtapose and Story Maps. And there are a number of different things you could ask students to create and represent their ideas through maps, through images. I think that's really powerful. Another great map making tool is the National Geographic Interactive Map Maker, where students can click in and add layers about like population and climate and all kinds of different data sets that basically get layered onto the map. So that can be a really powerful tool for them to generate some maps and take screenshots or do screencasts and think about those in unique ways. And then last but not least, not only can you go on Google AR and VR expeditions, students can design them and actually create them. And they can do that in a very simple way with this Night Lab Scene tool. But also there are development apps that they can use to create AR and VR experiences, which I know many English educators have used, like Google Lit Trips in conjunction with Google Earth. So again, thinking about all these different ways we can invite students into these experiences that, especially in remote learning, may not be ones they could experience live, but that they could engage in and also create on their own. All right. And then last but not least, and then this is actually going to get back to Susan's question in just a moment. How do we establish that classroom community? How do we keep people connected? So along the top row here, you see 3 tools that I think by bringing voice, even if you don't bring video, like in Flipgrid, I know it's designed for video, though you can record voice as well. And VoiceThread is a tool that allows students to annotate and add to documents through voice or video or through typing. And then I mentioned Vocaroo a few moments ago. That's just a tool where you log in and you click the big red button and you record a message, and then you can send that as a hyperlink to someone to listen to, or you can download the audio file and send it to them. I think the power of voice is super important. And the more opportunities that we give, say we're having a discussion forum in Schoology or on our Google Classroom, if we give students these opportunities to embed links to their voices, I think that could be very, very powerful. And especially for them to hear you giving them feedback on their work in your voice, even if it's asynchronous. The bottom row, I just wanted to make mention of Google Sites, Weebly, and Wix, because again, while you can never ask any student to make themselves completely public and available, and there may be FERPA compliance concerns, there may be student privacy concerns for other issues, one of the things I'd really encourage us to think about is how do we help students establish a space for themselves on the web? What is it that they might be able to do in order to create their own space? And if you're already a Google school, you could have students create Google Sites. They don't have to publish it out to the public web. They could just publish it for you to see and make you a collaborator, or their classmates collaborators. And you can help them build that kind of digital presence over the course of time. Quick question about Parlay. I have only briefly experienced a little bit of Parlay. I have not tried it in enough detail to even speak knowledgeably about it. So another new to me tool. Thank you so much. EduBlogs is another place where students could establish their digital portfolio too. I very much agree. All right. So again, if we were in Pear Deck, this would have been a moment for you to pause and write a little bit, but we're going to keep moving forward. This is where we get to that question about interactivity and how we use our time. And if we had been in Pear Deck, I was going to have you enter a number here and tell me approximately how many hours you spend giving feedback to students and how we could make best use of our time. And I think about that in a couple of ways. Like, what happens when we're sitting shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow with kids in the classroom? What happens in what I would call like the time shifted conferring, like I'm giving you feedback on your writing that happens, while you're still in process. And then where do I spend my time offering my final grades? What I'm hoping we might think about shifting a little bit and using these times when we can be online with them for 20 minutes, 45 minutes. And maybe we're not on 45 minutes with all 40 students in one day. Maybe we take them 5 at a time or 10 at a time, and we can do some smaller groups, or we can use breakout rooms. What can we do to make sure that the time we have is especially valuable, both for that conferring, but then also for class? So what I'm suggesting is that as we think about especially remote learning, not having every kid log on to Zoom at 9:45 to 10:32 every morning for my 3rd hour class, but to say, hey, on Mondays, I'd like to meet with this group of you. And on Tuesdays, I'd like to meet with this group of you. And on Wednesdays, this group of you. And give kids some autonomy for signing up when they might be available. And between small group and if you're allowed through your district to be in a virtual setting with your students one-to-one, which I know can be a security concern, but if you are allowed to do that, might you be able to spend more of your time conferring? You pull up that Google Doc that your student is working on, you're talking through it, you're giving them pointers, you're doing some real-time editing and revising together. And then you're giving them that voice feedback. You're recording that screencast. You're recording your voice in Vocaroo and sending them a message. And then finally, you're spending just that very little tiny bit of time at the end to say, hey, good job, fill out the rubric, last couple points, boom, you're done. This is the gift, if there are any gifts that the pandemic has given us, is that a lot of people got to move to credit, no credit, or at least ease off on the grading thing. And so I'm hoping that as we think about what those individual conferring times might look like, we can kind of change our paradigm. Also, to answer the question earlier from Susan, you know, if I have you in a Zoom meeting room or a Google Meet or a WebEx or whatever room we are together for whatever time we have, ideally, I would not be doing what I'm doing right now, talking at you. I would want to be talking with you and inviting you to talk with one another. So I think there are ways that we do that strategically. We can share with students ahead of time. Hey, here's the thing I want you to read or watch, and here's what I want you to be thinking about as you come to class. Here's a shared Google Doc. Do some pre-writing, do some commenting on your classmates' pre-writing, share your thoughts and ideas there. So when we log in together, we're ready to go with discussion. Or use Jamboard, or use Padlet, or use one of these other tools. Or here, use our Flipgrid and record. So when we get together, we're ready to start doing the business that we have at hand. Also, thinking about what it is that we want students to do during that time, giving them some clear expectations. One of my colleagues, Janet Nair from our Chippewa River Writing Project, was talking about how just as she does in her classroom, she gives students roles in the Zoom meeting. You're the timekeeper, you're the note taker, you're the person who's gonna help me make sure we're keeping track of the text and everyone's contributing to the document. So she sets up those roles for students. And also during that time, set a timer for yourself. Teachers are notorious for saying, okay, we're gonna spend 5 minutes on, and then 23 minutes later, we get lost. That's actually one of the things I really like about Zoom and the breakout room feature is you're going to have 5 minutes to talk in your small groups. I'm going to send you the 1 minute warning, and then I'm going to bring you back together. And much like just being sucked through cyberspace or a hyperspace lane and Star Wars or whatever, they all come back to the main room and people laugh and they were in mid-sentence, but that's okay because it helps us kind of stay accountable to time. Another thing, you know, for instance, I just had one of my classes do a debate the other night, and I had structured it all out. Like this side's going to get 2 minutes, this side's going to get 2 minutes, this side's going to get 2 minutes, this side's going to get 2 minutes. Put your name in the 2 minute slot where you're talking. And if you talk more than 2 minutes and 10 seconds, I'm hitting mute on your microphone. And at first it was kind of awkward, but then they kind of got that I was serious and we got our debate done in the hour that we had. So I think all of those ways that we think about the protocols and discussions that we've seen from like the National School Reform Faculty or the School Reform Initiative, the power of protocols is real. If we set up and we let students know ahead of time what we expect them to do, and then we manage the fluidity of the discussion, then we can make sure that we're not just lecturing at them, but actually engaging. And we can save the lecture for a screencast that we might send out on Sunday night or Monday morning as they get ready for their class discussion later that week. I hope that helps a little bit. And I see there's a lot of chat going on. So I'm going to pause for a moment, Janelle, and you tell me where we're at with things.
Sure. Here's a great question from Renee from our live stream. And she asks, how do you balance out the screen time? Do you recommend some pen and paper activities too? And if so, how might students share those?
So I love that question. Another one of my colleagues from the Chippewa River Writing Project and a co-author of Creating Confident Writers, Andy Shinborn, he structures his online meetings as writing workshops. And he invites students at the beginning of the workshop in whatever form you're most comfortable. It might be on a Post-it notepad. It might be in your writer's notebook. It might be on your iPad. It might be on your keyboard, wherever you're most comfortable. Let's write. And then what's cool is that even if it is on a Post-it note, we have these great things that can take pictures and can scan them and send them and put them on Padlet walls or in shared Google Docs or OneNote notebooks. So I think especially in that rough draft stage where we want people to write, and I think about Penny Kittle's work, her notebooks are so robust, right? We want to have that opportunity to freehand and doodle. If kids want to write their first drafts in notebooks and then move them into digital spaces, I think that's totally fine. And I think we might even encourage them to do that periodically.
And as a follow-up question to that, as we think about Writer's Workshop, I know in my own practice, trust is really important. So do you have any recommendations for building trust, getting students used to peer feedback, more comfortable sharing as we consider Writing Workshop as a way of engaging our students in process-based writing?
Absolutely. So yeah, start small, right? We have to start with some icebreakers and some relationship building. But in those first, times that we're giving peer response, we start small. We don't even, it could be maybe high school kids would think it's a little goofy, but you can do like 2 stars and a wish, or I see, I think, I wonder. And then you get moving up to the bigger, more complicated things over time. Like, oh, is that really an effective argument that you're presenting? Have you brought in appropriate evidence? Things like that. And do that in multiple ways. And especially do that when you have time together in the Zoom room or in the Google Meet. What is it that you want to accomplish together? Might be, hey, you've each done some pre-writing. I'm going to push you to breakout rooms for 5 minutes. It's just going to be the 2 of you. And again, I recognize for some districts, there are security issues. This may not work for everyone. You may have to do it in a large group and try to move students along so they have time with their voices. I'll show another quick tool really quickly here that I used effectively during our demos of during the writing project. But, again, short, small, sweet, so let's say, Janelle, you've just shared, and then I am going to say, all right, we're going to have one person give you some positive feedback. So now that Janelle has shared her writing, let's get some positive feedback from Jane. Jane, could you please take the microphone and give Janelle some positive feedback? Okay, Jane, now your turn to read. Jane's read, and then we move on to the next. And again, as you're thinking about how you might do that, or we might say, well, here's who's up next to share their writing. Here's who's up next. Here's who's up next. You can kind of do those types of things. You can even use lineup mode too. So this is a tool on flippity.net, which I think I linked in the shared document. All right, I know we're easing toward the end, and I know, Janelle, you really wanted me to talk about like my arc of writing instruction and how it might be different in different classrooms and different contexts. So I kind of want to move forward with that, but are there other big questions from the chat?
Let's hold those questions until you share with us your arc of instruction.
Okay, perfect. So what might this look like? I return back to the guiding questions, knowing that we may all return back to school on August 17th or September 1st, or I'm picking random dates. And the first positive case might show up that day and everybody goes home again. And we don't know what's going to hold true in terms of the calendar, but we know what holds true in terms of good writing practice and instruction. And so what I wanted to try to think through with you quickly is that no matter whether we go to a traditional, a hybrid, a fully remote model, and this is just one example, and you could click through into the link and look at that in more detail if you want to. This is just one example from one school district. We know there are some building blocks for good instruction. And I took from this recent post from Catlin Tucker, who talks a lot about blended and online learning, that we want to try to model inquiry. We want to try to push students towards deeper exploration. We want to try to encourage them to try things and play with things, especially since they have space in remote learning to do this. They're not confined by the 47.5 minutes that we typically feel in the school day. Hopefully they'll take a little more time and space. If they don't, ultimately that's on their shoulders, but we've provided them with the opportunity to do all these types of things. So what might this look like? I wanted to show you quickly the way that I've structured one lesson for 2 different audiences both in terms of age level and in terms of the time that I spend working with them. So in the first instance of this lesson, and you can link to these from the bottom of my shared document, and so you can link to them, and I'm going to play a quick little video of me talking to sixth graders in my instructional screencast here in just a moment. But you can kind of get a sense of how I would structure this activity for university freshmen who I got to see over multiple days. And this activity in the version that you're looking at for the university freshmen gave them a lot of choice. They had to pick the topic from the All Sides website. They had to create their own word cloud using Voyant tools. They got to go in and pull some ideas from the They Say, I Say sentence templates. And I was able to scaffold that both because they were a little bit older and more mature students, but also because we were face-to-face, we had plenty of time. The second version of the lesson, and I'm going to play just a little bit of my video intro to that lesson, was with my friend and colleague and Chippewa River Writing Project leader and co-author Jeremy Heiler. He invited me to co-teach for a week during remote learning this spring. And that was for sixth graders. And you'll see in that version of the document, there's a lot more scaffolding. I didn't let them pick the topic. I told them that I got it from All Sides, but you see that I picked the topic. I put in the headlines and the images and things like that. I really pared down on the questions and I focused the questions for them. And you'll see that that arc of instruction was really designed for 1 week, and it was meant to be for middle school students who would have to do a lot on their own with just 2 screencasts to kind of support them. So let me play for you just a little tiny bit of this screencast. And I'm going to pull it up in pure view so you don't get all of the ads and all that. So I'm going to fast forward through my introductory material and talk just a little bit about where I pulled in those articles and the main kind of instructional points I want them to consider. Janelle, if the sound doesn't come through right away, please let me know. This debate, we're going to now move back into our document. What I've done here is I've captured just a social media style headline. Like if I were to find this on Facebook or Twitter or someone were to have sent it to me in a text message, I'm going to see these dominant images with the headlines, and I'm going to see the source from where they came from. What I'd like you to think about right now are these 3 questions. As you look at this, who created the message and what do you already know about these 2 sources? So you could write a little bit about that down here. Secondly, what creative techniques are being used to attract my attention? So for instance, what do you see in the headlines? Quite literally, what words do you see that are most dominant as you look across the headlines? And then also, what do you notice about the photographs? What is it that's most important and prominent in the photographs? What's in the background of the photographs? Who are the types of people being featured in the photographs? So you're going to take a few moments and really puzzle through and think about what you see. And again, you're going to fill that information in right here. I'm going to pause there because I think that gives you a little bit of a flavor of what that might look like in the instructional context. And again, I created 2 videos, both of which are linked in the document. One Jeremy sent out early in the week. Well, actually what Jeremy and I did is we got on Zoom and we recorded a quick little 5-minute overview. He posted that Sunday night, Monday morning. Then he posted my video Monday. Then he posted the other video on Wednesday. And he sent that template out to students so they all had forced a copy and they were all able to work through it, and it was all shared through his Google Classroom and things like that. So again, you can kind of see what those arcs of instruction would look like. If I had lots of time and I'm working with older students and they can do more of the inquiry on their own and I'm there beside them to answer questions quickly, there's that. But also we can do it in different ways. And the other thing then too is if you're in that constant communication with students, you could push that out to them and say, hey, we have our scheduled synchronous time coming up on Wednesday. And I want you to have this much done by this period of time. And then could you please be ready to share with a partner when you get into our virtual call in Zoom or in Google Meet when we come together on Wednesday, because very quickly after I do a quick introduction, you're going to be out in breakout rooms and you're going to be talking about your headlines and what you've noticed. And the last thing I'll point out on that doc then is that you see the space at the bottom where students are finally crafting the argument of their own, where I had copied and pasted in the sentence templates. And again, that could require different levels of scaffolding. You could go in on those documents, put a comment, record a voice recording on Vocaroo, put that in the comment. All of these things that you could say, set up a calendar appointment with me for Friday, and I'm gonna have a 15-minute appointment with each of you about your writing. We have to think outside of the 45 minutes or the 90-minute literacy block. And we have to start thinking about, what do we want students to experience like over 3 days or over 5 days or over 10 days? And not just in the traditional way that we think of like unit planning, but in the idea of, again, this arc of instruction from the beginning to the end, where they have a full and complete experience that's substantive and meaningful. I'm going to share just a few final tips, and then Janelle, I'm sure we have some additional questions, and I'll take a few questions. I won't read all of these in detail, but just to, at the top level, just to remind some of the questions that have already come up in the chat about equity and access. Try to plan your document, create your materials in ways that students can download and access them offline as well. The tools, people have asked how many tools to use. Well, again, pick a number that's comfortable for you that you can use in multiple creative and critical ways. Virtual teaching is not new. It's been around a while, but it's been, can I say, very didactic in the past. Read this, watch this, do the discussion forum, or read this, watch this, interactive quiz, maybe do a discussion forum. We have opportunities with these tools that we have right now to interact with students in more robust and meaningful ways. And I think that we really need to take advantage of them. And so let's do that. Be human, be humane, connect with students, collaborate with them, you know, set up your messaging platform, whatever way you're going to communicate, so they have a straight line to you. Build relationships, especially when you're in these virtual settings. Talk about when it's appropriate to have your camera on, when it's appropriate to have your camera off, how you want people to communicate and chat and so forth. And then also celebrate, notice and celebrate, help them build those portfolios, help them publish to those broader writing communities, help them share through social media if that's appropriate and within the acceptable use policy of your district and your students feel comfortable, but give them those wider audiences and really celebrate what it is that they have done. So with that, I'm going to pause for a moment, put our guiding questions back up here. I had hoped we were going to have a little more time and Pear Deck was going to cooperate and people would share some of their ideas for arcs of writing instruction, but Janelle, I'm sure there's a few questions left in the chat and we can kind of spend some time talking about those.
Absolutely. Two broad themes that are both on our YouTube live stream chat as well as the Q&A function in Zoom center around engagement, that's student engagement, as well as pacing. How do you know, Troy, that your students are engaged? And also, can you speak about pacing at different grade levels?
Yeah, so again, I teach at a university level, so I recognize my experience with thinking about student engagement comes through watching my own teenagers who are in high school and early college now, as well as the multiple conversations I have with educators. In fact, we just spent 2 weeks in our Chippewa River Writing Project Remote Literacy Institute, and teachers were talking about this all the time. So clearly this spring, for a variety of reasons, we had a number of students who fell off the radar, and there are countless reasons for that. But as we start this fall, we need to, again, be really intentional. So choose those channels. Maybe for you, it's Remind. Like Remind is your channel. That's the easiest way for you to communicate with students and parents. For others, it might be Google Voice. For others, you may choose to use email. Whatever it is, maybe Voxer, if that seems appropriate. I don't know what it is, but make sure that you have that channel and that you're using it. And when you don't hear from students in a certain amount of time, you try to reach out to them directly. Make that strategic phone call every now and again if you need to, but also encourage them to communicate with one another. And again, if you have the luxury and the ability to have them in synchronous time in a video chat, I'll say this bluntly, don't talk at them for 45 of the 50 minutes. Talk with them and invite them to talk with one another. We know that, oh, how's that old aphorism? I think it's a Britain quote, like writing flows on a sea of talk or something like that. If we want them to be writers, we have to give them opportunities to talk and to collaborate. So make sure that we do that. And then again, choose those tools wisely and use them creatively.
Here's a second question focusing on feedback. You may have already addressed this a bit, but I'll come back to it. Janelle from our webinar Q&A asks, how can I provide effective, sustainable feedback on a virtual platform? Without in-person writing conferences, this seems daunting and overwhelming.
It can. So again, I choose very strategically when and how I'm going to give feedback. Some of that's just dictated by life and the number of classes I'm teaching and how much time I have. Some of it is dictated by the type of assignment that I give. So for instance, for all my students who just got feedback from me this morning, I kind of apologize, but I had 4 or 5 little sentence template starter things. And as I was reading the 20+ papers from my students this morning, add comment, copy, paste, fill in the last 5 words based on whatever that student wrote. Scroll down to the next thing, comment, copy, paste. Here's the next comment. Comment banks work. They're really appropriate and useful. Now that was because everybody was doing the same assignment and it was kind of utilitarian. But when I go to read their final papers here at the end of the week, I'm going to actually record voice feedback. I'm going to make sure that I log in, read their papers fully before I put any comments on them at all. And then I'm going to use in Blackboard, or I could use Vocaroo, but Blackboard has a recording feature as well. I'm going to record a voice message. And then on their Google Doc, I'm just going to tag them and say, hey, just wanted to let you know I've read your whole essay. Please go listen to all my voice feedback in Blackboard. And that's all I'm going to put in their Google Doc, but then they go to Blackboard and they can listen to it. So that's going to take more time actually to read the whole thing, record a 4 or 5 minute voice response to them. And yet I think it will be more meaningful for them on that particular assignment. So it's an ebb and a flow. And we go back to that conversation about the automated tools. When are the times and places and ways that we can ask students to engage and with the automated feedback? So here is what Revision Assistant told you. Look at it, take a screenshot, tell me how you're going to make revisions, and then I'm going to look at those revisions and I'm just going to give you feedback on those revisions. So, yeah. So does an arc of instruction mean learning cycle for less? Kind of. I'm also, I think about arc in the sense that we are distant, right? Like this is the challenge. Like when we think about lessons, we're thinking about Monday, I'm doing this, Tuesday, I'm doing this, Wednesday, I'm doing this, and that's going to all lead to Thursday and Friday, where would they produce this and I'm done. Or maybe next Monday, if we had a snow day. When I think about an arc, what I'm thinking is, what is it? How do I want to lead them through the writing process? And how might I have to flex and move that? And what are the different tools that I might need to incorporate? So if I'm remote one day and then suddenly we have to take 2 weeks off, or if I know I'm only going to see them every other day, what are the things that they can strategically do asynchronously? I hope that I'm trying to introduce this new language and I'm puzzling through it at the same time too. So Janelle, you had a question and I cut you off. I'm sorry.
Yes, I think our final question today will center on supporting students in learning 1 or 2 tools or the tools that you intend to use throughout the school year. So Megan from our webinar asks, how would you recommend teaching students how to use a digital tool if we don't have the luxury of sitting side by side?
Yes. So I think the first thing to do is let them play. I learned this lesson a long time ago from a mentor when I was at Michigan State as a graduate student, Punya Mishra, and then I saw it really enacted by one of our first writing project co-directors at Chippewa River, Penny Liu. And what Penny would do when she was introducing digital storytelling, kids would get overwhelmed with iMovie. Oh my gosh, how do I do this? How do I do that? Well, what she would do is say, in this first one day, this first 45 minutes where we're learning how to do iMovie, all you're doing is taking a nursery rhyme and making a movie out of it. So, and she would already have, because even kids weren't always familiar with all the nursery rhymes, she would have a few, or roses are red, violets are blue, or twinkle, twinkle, little star, just some quick things. Learn how to record your voice, learn how to get an image off the internet, put it in there, wow, look, in 45 minutes, you made your first digital story. And the kids weren't worried about the writing process at that moment. They were just trying to play with the tool and push buttons and try a number of different things. So that's pretty important to just give them that space to play. Then they would go through and say, oh, I can put transitions in this movie. Oh, I can speed up the film clip, or I can slow down the film clip. I can use different Ken Burns effects. I can do that. So they've already played a little bit, and then they start to think about the tool in a little bit more robust way. And then that goes back to inform their writing process. So again, I would say the extent to which you can give them a task and say, hey, this is a low stakes task. Do it, you earn points. Don't do it, you don't earn the points. Credit, no credit. You're going to try to make a 30-second video in Adobe Spark. Here's a quick little screencast tutorial from me, and here's a link to the Adobe help guide. You have 2 days to make it. Go. Or if you're in class in school, you have 45 minutes to make it. Go, and give them that chance to do it. So play is important.
Thank you so much, Troy. At this time, I invite Carol to join our call, our video and audio, and provide our concluding remarks.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank you, Troy, for just providing such an amazing wealth of information today, and for being so human and so humane. You have amazing equanimity. And I have to say, as an old non-digital native, it's a little comforting to see the expert not have all the technology go perfectly and see how you rolled with it so beautifully. To everyone who joined us today from across the United States and around the world, we hope to see you during our next webinar, which features a great friend of ours, Kelly Gallagher, who will share techniques for helping kids to tell their narrative stories, both in hybrid and remote learning spaces. After today's event, you can go to writecenter.org and fill out a question feedback form. You can get a link to replay this webinar, and you can register for 3 more webinars that we have offered in September. We're very excited about these webinars. The first one is on September 14th. It features Dr. David Kirkland, who Troy made mention of. He's a distinguished professor at New York University, and he's going to be talking about how you serve diverse populations both during and beyond the pandemic through culturally responsive, sustaining remote education and anti-racist pedagogy. On September 21, we'll be learning from Dr. Maisha Wynn. She's a Chancellor's Leadership Professor at UC Davis, and she's going to be talking about transformative justice in English language arts pedagogy. We'll conclude our webinar series with Antero Garcia on September 28th. He's from Stanford University, and he's going to be talking about how to center youth civic voices and explore how writing can help us address issues of when we're dealing with complex emotions. So we're very excited about all 3 of those. We thank you again for joining our learning community today. If you didn't know about Write Center, I hope you'll come to our website and see all the various resources we have to offer. And again, thank you to Troy for such a great session. So goodbye for now.